are safe and well in your homes and looking after yourself and your loved ones and those close to you. I'm Alexander Shelley, Music Director of Canada's National Arts Centre Orchestra. And for those of you who don't know us, we're based at Canada's flagship arts institution, the National Arts Centre, just opposite Parliament in the nation's capital. I, however, am speaking to you from my hometown of London, England, where I've been since the beginning of lockdown. To members of our NAC community who are watching, I want to tell you how much the orchestra and I are missing you and how much we're looking forward to celebrating live music with you again as soon as possible. And to everybody else who's watching, a very, very warm welcome. I'm so grateful that you've joined me here live today as we all try to create a virtual bond across the internet. Musically Speaking is a bi-weekly hour-long live session in which I welcome stars of the classical music world to tell us about themselves, to talk about their life and art and music and the world, and to field not just my questions, but your questions. 2 weeks ago, I interviewed James Ennis, and we received some fabulous live questions throughout, so please don't be shy. Share any questions you have for us and for my wonderful assistant, Kelly, who's fielding everything and who appears as my face in the box below. She's in the chat box and she'll feed those to me. We'll try and field as many questions as possible, but please forgive me if we don't get to all of them. So I'm thrilled to welcome today's guest, who is, in my opinion, one of the most inspired and inspirational musicians on the planet. She's a Latin Grammy Award winner. She's a recipient of the 4th International Beethoven Award and the Rockefeller Award. She's an Amnesty International Honorary Consul. She's featured at the Women of the World Festival, performed twice at the World Economic Forum in Davos, and was a featured performer at Barack Obama's 2008 presidential inauguration. She's a pianist, she's a composer, and she's one of the most exceptional improvisers I've ever encountered. She's so unique, in fact, that she was the subject of a functional magnetic resonance imaging investigation of her brain by Johns Hopkins University, Baltimore, who basically just figured out that she was a genius, and that was it. She's also a regular and much loved collaborator with the NAC Orchestra and features on our latest album, which is going to be released tomorrow. So please join me virtually in giving a hugely warm welcome to my dear friend, Gabriela Montero.
Hello, hi, Ale.
Hi.
Hello, everybody. I've never done this before, so this is quite exciting.
Well, I'm so thrilled you're here. Were you able to hear the spiel, my intro?
I did. I'm a bit blushed.
Teary. Well, I have to tell you, we've known each other for quite a while, and when preparing the kind of initial introduction, I walked downstairs to my wife, and I was like, I cannot fathom how normal Gabby is when you spend time with her, because this woman is unbelievable. I knew it, but just reading the accolades, it's extraordinary. Anyway, let's start from the beginning. How are you and your family?
Thank you. We're okay. We're in Barcelona. We're together, and just wondering how everybody else is as well, and also taking time, to be together and to spend the time that we normally don't have as a family. And I've just enjoyed taking a few weeks off from playing, which kind of brought me back renewed inspiration, and just preparing a few things that I'm going to be working on and composing as well, and so getting back into it now.
When was the last time you had a break like this?
I think I had not had my second daughter yet, so it was probably about 17 years, a long time.
Yeah. I think that's one of the strange things about our industry. When you're in the middle of it, the moment to catch a breath and to reflect in kind of a deep way or do anything is very hard, because it's a non-stop business. And I mean, I know there are many people out there who are suffering tremendously, and there's nothing about the current situation which is kind or warm or anything. But there is one aspect which is of calm for a moment, which I have to say I'm appreciating. I don't know how you're finding that.
No, absolutely. I because my kids are older now, and they live in different parts of the world, to come together and to actually be here and have the time to actually do things together and discuss, different things that we haven't had the time to really go deep into, let's say, conversations that we were missing, has been a blessing in that way, because we have the family time finally. I think what the public doesn't normally realize is that when you're on this crazy train of performing, and traveling and going from hotel to hotel, you just never have a chance to even breathe. So to just be a person and to be able to just enjoy the little things of every day. And of course, we're all wondering what's going to come next and what is the world going to look like. And we're all concerned and worried. But at the same time, I'm trying to take the positive out of this as much as possible and do beautiful, productive things while we're in this kind of limbo.
Great. Well, I agree. So
Yeah.
I know bits about you because I love you and I think you're amazing and we work together. But I want our audience to get to know you in a little bit of detail first. And I'm going to do what I did with James Ennis 2 weeks ago, which is a quick fire round of questions. Okay, so you can they're either or, and you just answer one of the words. You can have one veto. So if you don't like a question, you get one opportunity to say I'm not answering that.
Okay, I wasn't
with very
expecting
fast
this.
questions, and then later there's some more, slightly longer answers are welcome. Okay, here we go.
Okay.
Ready? Mornings or evenings?
Evenings.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Save or spend?
Oh, spend.
City lights or green expanses?
Nowadays, green expanses.
Okay, but did that change very recently?
Yeah, I as I get older, I appreciate nature so much more. I didn't really grow up with nature or feeling connected to it, and now I just crave being in a forest. That's really, I'm going to end up living in a cabin somewhere without email or anything at some point.
But with Sam, your partner.
Yes.
Cat or dog?
Dog.
Head or heart?
Heart.
Listen or talk?
Listen.
Old school or avant-garde?
Bit of both, actually. Bit of both, yeah.
Dine in or dine out?
Oh, dine out. I don't like to cook.
Oh, okay. Federer or Nadal?
Nadal. He's cuter.
Oh, interesting. Okay, this is a quote from Pink Floyd. Would you rather have a walk-on part in a war or a lead role in a cage?
Ooh, a lead role in a cage.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. If you weren't a musician, what would your dream job be?
I would love to be a social worker, a philanthropist, a bit of the human rights activist, that I'm able to do now, but on a much larger scale.
Okay. And what job would you be least good at?
Oh, anything with accounting, mathematics, anything that means that, refers to logic or needs to have that kind of.
Okay. Is this a preemptive excuse for the IRS when you file something?
Oh gosh, let's not even go there. I have to do that now. I have to go through all my papers in my office. If
you could meet and talk to anyone in history, who would it be?
I would have loved to have met Rachmaninoff.
Really?
Sam always says that if reincarnation exists, and as you know, he doesn't believe in any of that, but he says if it did, that I was probably married to him or we had a very close relationship because his music just overwhelms me.
Me too.
Yeah.
Okay, we're nearly there. It's fabulous. Favorite hobby?
Be with the people that I love. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Definitely.
What is your greatest fear, if you have any?
You know what? I'm not afraid of death. I am afraid of the suffering that comes with it, from the people that either you love or love you and experiencing that loss. But aside from that, I'd have to say my greatest fear is that Venezuela will never come out of the situation it's in now, and that I'll never live to see it. Yeah.
Well, I want to, in the course of this interview, I want us to spend a lot of time talking about your relationship to the country, of course. So I'll come back to that. And without wanting to sound abrupt, I have the last 3 questions. They're all kind of related. So 3 things to take to a desert island. What would be your book? What would be your movie? And what would be your piece of music?
My movie, I love a film by Kieslowski called The Double Knife of Veronique, which I saw ages ago when I was a student in London, and I was forever gripped by his style, and I started to do a little bit of research on his other films, and I just love that film, and I haven't really seen it since then because it just belongs to that time of my life,
Cool.
And funny, yesterday at the table, we were talking with my daughter Natalia about, she's an English literature major, about the books that we love. And I was saying that one of my favorite books is The Master and Margarita. And I was telling Sam that I read it so many times and it makes such a big impact on me. But if you were to ask me in-depth questions about it now, I have to revise it. But it's one of those books that I absolutely loved. And the music, you said? I have an incredible love for Rachmaninoff's first piano concerto. The second movement just just tears me down. It's just one of the most beautiful pieces of music ever written, or everything that he wrote, really.
And he was so, his I think his fragility of personality in the best sense. He was so sensitive. People who only sort of get to know him fleetingly, they don't realize, because he was this big man and he's strong and big hands and incredible virtuoso, but he was the most sensitive of souls. And I find that it pours out of his music. It's almost every moment brings you to tears because of the sensitivity of it,
It's unabashedly wearing his heart on his sleeve, It's just completely out there without any filters. And especially at a time when this was not the style that was, in vogue, this kind of composing. He just went against the grain and he just said what he had to say. He said it with his heart and full honesty, and it really comes through.
And it's endured, it was worth doing that for him, because it's still some of the most beloved music ever written. People love it. They flock to it. They listen to it in concerts and recordings. So good.
And
anyway,
I so wish that he had experienced that love at the time when he was alive and not felt defeated as a composer as he did. And actually reveled in this creative, force that he had, and known that people would have, would continue to love it for decades to come. Yeah.
So, well, thank you for those beautiful answers. Moving on, so musically speaking, this show is being hosted on NAC's Canada Performs platform, which features live music. And but ironically, seeing as you're, I think, could be considered one of the greatest living improvisers, you're on a vacation for the piano, which I deeply respect and is, of course, very well deserved, and it's a very healthy thing to do. So we're actually going to play in live recordings of yours that you've shared with us, and try to tell your story also through your music. And in a moment, I want to talk to you about your early years, but it seems that all your compositions are either autobiographical or they deal with an issue that is very, very important to your heart. And for the music that we're about to hear, your program notes start with the sentence, "My story is a modern one in many ways." So we're going to hear your Latin concerto. Could you briefly introduce it for us?
Yeah, my Latin concerto is unlike my very first composition for piano and orchestra called Expatria. It's not a political statement. It's more, let's say, a portrait of Latin America. And, when people think of Latin America, they think of rhythm, they think of sensuality, they think of, mojito in hand, they think of Buena Vista Social Club, they think of all of this rapturous, beautiful, natural character that is part of the Latin American spirit, but they don't necessarily think about the darker sides of that actually sabotage those those beautiful qualities that we have. And I wanted to write a piece that didn't directly address the political issues there or sociological issues, but rather spoke about the shadows and also show the beauty and the rhythm and all of that we love about Latin America. So it's a very contrasting work, which is very funky, it's very rhythmical, but it also has an underlying a shadow that you can sense during the whole piece. And it's really my statement of Argentinian, Venezuelan, Cuban, Mexican music, and but it's in the contemporary music language.
Fantastic. So to our audience, a reminder: feel free to write in any questions you might have for Gabriela, and we'll try to answer them in the course of the next remaining 45 minutes. But for the moment, enjoy Gabriela's Latin Concerto. This is featuring the Orchestra of the Americas, conducted by Carlos Miguel Prieto.
Still me.
Okay, so that didn't seem to work.
Didn't work.
Kelly, who's behind the scenes doing magical things, can we have another go at that, or do you think it's not going to work? Here we go.
I just want to press the play button.
I know, I want to press that button right
Me
there.
too.
We have a comment from Steinway and Sons, Barcelona. The Latin Concerto is amazing.
Yes,
Hi, Kelly.
And
Hi. Unfortunately, it says video unavailable. Watch this video on YouTube. So I'm not able to play your video.
Oh, no.
I'm sorry, we didn't test that before. We had tested other things, but this doesn't seem to be working. I will see if we can find another link, and we'll keep talking.
We'll keep talking for the moment, and if we can get back to it, we will do. Okay, well, I want to come back to the Latin Concerto. So it was going to be a sort of link into the beginning of your story. You know, you're a mother. I'm a father of a little toddler, and as a father and as a musician who spends time working with young people in education projects around the world, the question of how to identify and nurture talent is something fascinating to me. But also the question of how an environment, and if an environment influences those things, or whether it's just innate. And sort of with an eye to that, through that prism, please do just tell us a little bit about your early years, sort of leading through until when you completed your study. So a long time, but if you can give us a little sort of encapsulated version.
It's a long story. I mean, when I grew up in Caracas. I was born in Caracas, and my parents are not musicians. And for my first Christmas, when I was 7 months old, my mom went out into the town and bought Christmas presents for the kids in the family. For some reason, she chose a little piano, a little toy piano for my cousin, who's a little bit older than I am. And when my grandmother saw this little piano, once my mom had arrived home with all the gifts, she insisted that I get that for my Christmas. But I was only 7 months old. So my parents were quite surprised. And at first, you know, they argued that I was too young. But inevitably, my grandmother, who was a Taurus like me, won the argument, and the little piano ended up in my crib. So my mom would sing to me every night the national anthem of Venezuela, and you know, all these lullabies and children's songs to put me to sleep. And my parents noticed that I would spend hours every day trying to pick out the melodies from these songs. And by the time I was a year and a half, I was playing all of these songs by ear, the national anthem, and you know, tunes that I would hear in the radio. And the piano became my favorite toy. It was a very logical and natural evolution. It was just like my best friend. I was also improvising since I was a little girl. And then when I was 4, I started lessons with the best-known piano teacher in Venezuela at the time, Lil Tiempo, who was a wonderful pedagogue. And at 5, I gave my first recital. 8, I gave my debut with orchestra, playing the Haydn D major. And then after that, she moved to Europe, and my parents decided that we needed to leave Venezuela and move to the US so I could study and continue my career there as a child. So that's how it started.
And we may be able to touch in greater depth on the question of the sistema in the sort of segment where I wanted to talk a bit about the politics. But how would you judge? I mean, obviously your family brought music to you, and they noticed then the gift. What would you say music education was like in Venezuela at the time? Because it's for better or worse, and I know something we'll talk about. It is considered by many who see one view of it as kind of the example of how to educate young people. So what was it like in your childhood?
Well, I was never part of the sistema because the sistema was for orchestra musicians, and I always had private piano teachers. So it was never, I always played with them and performed as a soloist, but so did so many others. There was always a lot of music in Venezuela. I mean, the sistema was not the first. There were conservatories that were free. I mean, there was an incredible tradition of music making. It's just a very naturally musical country. And well, I mean, I think it's best not to put anything or anyone on a pedestal in general. I think it's important important to investigate, and it's important to look into things and not just be enamored by the gloss. And you know, I've met, of course, a lot of wonderful people that come from the Sistema, or that were in the Sistema, you know, during all these years that I was connected to Venezuela musically. But I guess my main concern and my cause for criticism has been that there are a lot of things that are wrong that should be looked at, and that should be somehow explored and not just silenced. And that's my main philosophy anyhow as a human rights activist, whether it's about music or it's about politics or anything else.
Sure. And I guess we'll absolutely come back to, I guess what I was trying to ask was, do you feel like there was healthy access to good teachers for young Venezuelans at the time of your youth? Do you think that if someone else in a different family showed talent, that there was a good system in place for kind of nurturing that?
Oh yeah, there were good conservatories, and you know that had been there for a very long time. There were other orchestras, you know, that were not connected to the Sistema, which eventually they kind of suffocated, and you know, the Sistema cannibalized a lot of the funding. So unfortunately, these smaller entities ended up, you know, suffering a lot because of that. But there were, you know, wonderful musicians, and especially this kind of very spontaneous attitude towards music and towards improvising and towards connecting to the classical repertoire.
Absolutely. Fabulous. Well, we're lucky that you were able to provide us with a video of you aged 11 performing Grieg's piano concerto, and I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that this works, this video. But could you tell me, is it Maracaibo or Maracaibo?
Maracaibo.
It is a hard C, right?
Yes, Maracaibo. It's a very hot place in Venezuela, and it's where the oil comes from, and it's you know, it's a wonderfully colorful part of Venezuela city, and this was with the Orquesta Sinfónica de Maracaibo when I was 11 in Mexico City with Eduardo Rand, who was a wonderful Venezuelan conductor.
Yeah, it sounds beautiful. Kelly, do you think we can get this one going? Let's give it a try.
Played.
I could have listened to that for a long time. So for anybody who's watching who would like to hear the Latin concerto that we weren't able to play before, and hear more of the Grieg and more of anything that we're going to play to you in the interview, you can go to Gabriela's YouTube page, which is just full of gems, amazing stuff to watch, improvisations, older recordings, newer recordings. I can highly recommend it. I've spent many hours now looking at it and enjoying it. So if you want to hear more Grieg, you head there. And I mean, you know, obviously such a natural talent in that area of you know, performing concertos and performing solo piano music. We'll come to improvisation a little bit later, but I'd love to continue a little bit of this thread that we've pulled on a tiny bit, and talk about your relationship, your mature relationship with your mother country, because we met there. I think it was 2009 or 2010. Yeah,
it was right before I met my husband, actually.
Right. That was the first time we met. And am I right in thinking that was one of the last, if not the last time you actually performed in Venezuela?
It was my last trip to Venezuela, and it was my last concert in Venezuela. Yeah.
So can you from this auspicious beginning, and obviously, you know, highly respected as a young player there. How has it come to be that in the last 10 years you now haven't visited the country? Could you give us a sort of outline of how that relationship changed?
Well, I never imagined that would be the last time. You know, it's been 10 years now, and I never spent more than a year, maybe 6 months, you know, without returning home, because I've always been so connected to Venezuela. But what happened was that, you know, things started getting worse and worse there. And in fact, I lived with my girls from 2003 until 2006 in Caracas. So I got to really experience the gradual deterioration of the country in every respect. And we left in 2006 when it started to feel as though things were really turning into a really dire direction. And in 2010, I made my last visit, and then in 2000 and in the same year, actually, I started to denounce the Venezuelan government very frontally in all of the international press, and not just in social media, but really in the main newspapers and radio programs around the world. So I became a very visible enemy to the government. And I also, through my recording So Latino, which is about Latin American repertoire, I made a very overt political statement where I decided to omit the color red from the recording, which meant convincing EMI, the label EMI, who, I don't know if you remember, famously had the red and white logo. Well, I managed to convince them to remove the red. And for the first time in the history of the label, they actually changed the red to black, which is what I wanted, as a symbol of mourning. So I started to make very, very concrete, statements against the Venezuelan government, and it became more and more dangerous for me to return. And in these 10 years, I haven't stopped. I have been, in so many cases, the lone voice that just persistently spoke about what was happening, what was unraveling there, what people didn't know, maybe didn't care, maybe were not really aware of. And it became so much of my life in that decade. And it's been the hardest thing I have ever had to do in my life
Do you think you've been able to affect change? Do you get the impression that your words and your actions have in any way been able to move the conversation?
Well, I receive a lot of comments, a lot of thanks from Venezuelans for giving them a voice, also for putting the Venezuelan situation on, and in many cases when there was a lot of silence, on the international map, because I knew that to have access to press is a privilege, and it's a luck, especially when you have a story that is needing to be told, but there are not the outlets, to tell the story. And to be able to speak to journalists and to use my press time for Venezuela, I think was very valuable. And it's something that Venezuelans recognize, and they still thank me to this day for bringing to attention things, news and situations that were being hidden by the government. So I would like to think that I've done everything in my power, despite it hurting me and despite it, not being a positive thing for me in the least, but rather a negative thing. I would like to think that it meant something and that it helped in some way. And I think it did. I think so.
Do you feel like artists have a responsibility to be politically active and to use the position that they're in to challenge people when they see iniquities or when they see injustices in the world?
I mean, politics are complex. Nothing seems to be exactly what you think it is, and I've learned that, the hard way. But in my situation and in the Venezuelan situation, this goes far beyond politics. So I think when there is an obvious injustice and an obvious takeover of a country by what is a mafia, a criminal regime, we're not talking about, the nuances of politics. We're talking about loss of human life, we're talking about human rights abuses. I think absolutely, whether you are an artist, you're a carpenter, you're a hairdresser, you're a doctor, it doesn't matter who you are, you have a responsibility to speak about it and to shed light on it. And I think the excuse of being an artist should not even come into the picture when people say I don't get involved in that, because it's about community, it's about what's affecting others. And in my case, what's happened to Venezuela is so obvious today, but it wasn't back in 2010 when I started talking about it.
Yeah. And I mean, it's there are many reasons why doing concerts with you, being on stage with you, feels like a party. You know, just a normal concert is a big event. And one of them is that I don't think I remember doing a concert with you where there weren't very vocal Venezuelans in the orchestra going "Hey!" and screaming when you came on stage. And you know, there's obviously a huge groundswell of support out there. I mean, that must be very warming to experience.
It is, and it's what's given me the strength and the motivation to, against all odds, continue to do something that was not always understood or accepted, or even today. You know, there are consequences to speaking out. You position yourself, you stop being in the middle, you stop being on the fence, and automatically you're going to be either misunderstood or attacked. But Venezuelans know very well what the truth is, and what you see is the way of thanking me and appreciating the fact that, you know, I have no political interest. I have absolutely no, you know, aspirations. I don't do this because there's anything in it for me. It's just because I care, and they know that. And that's what you see, you know, with the flags and the hats and everything.
And your latest concerto, it really focuses explicitly on human rights in Venezuela. And what I'd love to do is ask Kelly to cue it up. And there's a sort of minute or so at the beginning where there are images that were shot in concert. And maybe you could start talking about the concerto, and we'll let Kelly roll it up, and we can hear you just describing it a little bit as we enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, it's Babel is really a piece. It's a piece for piano and string orchestra. It's 14 minutes, and I premiered it with Pro Musica in the US and also with the Scottish Ensemble. And it's really the work after Expatria and after the Latin Concerto and after 10 years of political activism for Venezuela, which really talks about my frustration at trying to deliver a message in a world that is so noisy and so full of biases that people don't stop to listen and actually look at facts and look at what's happening. What you see there are images of what has become common abuses by the government to Venezuela. And you can add to that, I mean, starvation, violence, I mean, just the worst possible reality. The piece opens with the images. Oh, that's just the beginning. Yeah. Then it becomes.
Yeah,
It becomes
sorry.
no. It becomes quite aggressive after that.
It's extraordinarily beautiful and melancholic and evocative. You know, I would just say to anybody who enjoyed that, go over to Gabby's YouTube page. Kelly has posted the URL for the Latin Concerto, by the way. So if you want to copy and paste that on the discussion that you see below the video, you can just go there. But you can list all these pieces in full length. I mean, you could spend days on Gabby's YouTube page and not get bored. So I really can recommend it. And I want to jump to something very different now. I mentioned that we met in Venezuela, and I remember it like it was yesterday because, well, for many reasons, but one of them was that we were doing Mendelssohn Piano Concerto, and someone said to me, "Oh, you know that Gabriela improvises her encores." I was like, "Oh, okay, that's nice," you know, and they said, "Yeah, she'll, you know, people sing a melody and she'll improvise on it," and you know, if you've ever spent any time around jazz or whatever, you're like, okay, well that's nice, but it's not such a big deal because people seem really excited about it. And I thought, yeah, okay. And then we did the concert, and you played the Mendelssohn sort of so beautifully, and it was such a great experience. And I came off stage, and you could sense everyone was excited you're about to improvise. And I was like, well, what is this excitement? And you went out there, and it was kind of a life-changing moment for me because I observed you talking to your audience and to asking them to sing out melodies, anything that came to their heads, and you'd pluck out the melody, you'd play it on the piano, you'd let it sort of soak into you. And what then came out the other end blew my mind. You talk about Rachmaninoff. I remember the first one you did. It was like listening to one of his preludes, fully worked out. It was 9 or 10 minutes. You just went. And with incredibly complex counterpoint and voice leading and a beautiful structure that it would take normal humans, you know, like a good week to kind of refine and get right. And that was a moment for me. I you know, it was extraordinary. And ever since then, I've experienced it live, and I've seen it on your videos. Was that something that was there first, or did you discover that in yourself as you started to grow as a pianist?
It was always there. It's just me saying hello to the instrument. It's always been there, and I'm pretty sure I basically started to improvise before anything else because, in fact, the piano lessons I had with Lille when I was 4, and by that time I was already playing, would be just her saying, "Gabrielita, improvise for me what happened during your week," and it would be, you know, 15 minutes of just improvisation, and that's just always that's what music is to me. That's where it comes from. That's how I understand the composers. That's how I compose. It's and I always have fun saying something that I probably shouldn't say, but I never had any theoretical studies or harmony. I never studied solfège. I never studied any of the basic musical, you know, subjects because for me, music is something else. It comes from a different place, and it's the way that I understand it and the way that I live it.
Which is why I find the research that Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore did so interesting, because if you're able to very quickly outline the results, the brain the part of your mind that is sort of on fire when you're improvising is different from when you're interpreting. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, Sam is the one who can kind of tell the story better than I can. It's already a published paper. This was done about 3 or 4 years ago, and it's going to be a documentary at some point. But basically, Dr. Charles Lim, when I arrived at the hospital, and this was my husband's idea, initially I was going to be in an MRI machine for 30 minutes, and he asked me to stay for an hour and a half. No, actually, for an additional hour and a half, so it was almost 2 hours. And what they wanted to see was how my brain would behave when I improvised versus when I played a scale, the same scale, and a written piece, and we chose the Bach Minuet. They weren't sure that there was going to be that much of a difference between the 3 states because I was my own control, which means I was not being compared to somebody else. So it was just one brain in the experiment and in the investigation. And what they realized was that when I improvised, a part of the brain that is not used for music and that they'd never seen behave like that, which is my visual cortex, is what takes over. So when people ask me, how do you improvise? And I say, I get out of the way. What happens neurologically speaking is that all the parts of my brain that are super active when I play a memorized piece, which is the normal parts of the brain, they actually almost go to sleep. And then my brain creates a neural pathway and co-ops to a more powerful part of the brain, which is the visual cortex, which is not used for music. And that's what happens. It's like I have two brains. And I used to say that to my father, actually, when I was little. I used to say, I feel like I have two brains, my improvising brain and then the one that plays Mozart, you know?
How fascinating.
Yeah.
You know, that description interests me because, I mean, if you're a towering tree, I'm just like a little daisy in the field. But when it comes to the state of mind, I find it also very interesting that when I prepare a piece, when I study, I go through a very cerebral process of analysis and sort of internalization.
Right.
But it is in order that when I'm then conducting in concert, I've noticed that it allows me to go into a state that I would just sort of, the feeling is one of being sort of meditative in the sense that I'm very focused in the moment in the sound. And I don't think also about any sort of material construct in the piece.
Right.
I sort of feel connected to it in a different way, unless something goes wrong, whereas a conductor, you need to then kind of be more consciously controlled. But in a very different way, I can see how that's a sort of key function of the mind of an instrumentalist, of a creative artist. Actually, I think sports people, I think people who do complex tasks where the slow brain is not going to work for you very well. You have to delve into that much deeper and much more fundamental part of the brain.
Right.
Anyway, we must all read that study. It's really extraordinary. And,
well,
sorry.
Can I just speak about Little Trees? No, you're not. What maybe your fans don't know is that you're a fantastic pianist. Alex is a wonderful pianist, and I've heard him play jazz, and he's a beautiful jazz pianist as well.
Oh, you're
a wonderful
very
pianist, and I haven't heard any of the classical stuff yet, but you have this wonderful natural pianism.
You're very kind. You're very kind. So the improvisation I wanted to use as a segue to our recording, which is coming out tomorrow, and I'm so excited about this because the recording is called Clara Robert Johannes, and it's I'll just sort of explain for our viewers and our listeners what's in store. So this is the first release of 4 double CDs that are going to be released in the coming seasons, and the Clara Robert Johannes refers to Clara Schumann, Robert Schumann, and Johannes Brahms. And these 3 individuals were linked not just through the age they lived in, but they were very close friends. Robert and Clara were, of course, married. Clara and Johannes Brahms had an incredibly close friendship. For the rest of their lives after Robert Schumann passed away, they were the 2 closest people to one another. And it's one of the great mysteries of musical history, whether their relationship went any deeper than that or any further than that. But these 3 people were inexorably linked. And we, in the recordings, we put down all 4 of Schumann's symphonies alongside all 4 of Johannes Brahms' symphonies. And I feel that these works really play to the many strengths of the NAC orchestra, but it really brings out the best in the orchestra and showcases it. But for me, most interestingly in this set, we glue those 2 cycles of symphonies together with the music of Clara Schumann, who was the person that glued those 2 great composers together. She influenced them, she inspired them, she was a confidant, she gave them advice. She was a powerhouse. She was an improviser, she was a composer, she was a concert pianist traveling the world. She had 8 children. And when I look at how she behaved and who she was and how inspirational she must have been to sort of speak to those 2 very inspiring men as well, I can think of no more perfect collaborator to record her concerto than you. So tell me, do you, and by the way, for those watching, Gabriela is the soloist playing Clara's concerto, just in case it wasn't clear. Gabriela, how do you relate to Clara Schumann, if at all? What are your thoughts about her, feelings about her?
Well, to be honest, Alex, I mean, I had only played her piano sonata a few years ago, and which we recorded, for this set. And I wasn't really that familiar with her concerto. I knew she had written one, but I didn't even have the score. And had you not asked me to be the soloist in this project, I might have never learned it. And I want to thank you for forcing me to learn this concerto, because one gets a little bit lazy with the crazy traveling, and you end up not really learning that much repertoire when you don't have the time. But I had to learn this, and I really grew to love it. And I think I saw it because she was so young when she wrote it. I could see this budding, incredible, a very personal voice and let's say romanticism that was quite it was quite feverish, I think, especially for someone so young. And you can really feel her wanting to push through and be her own person. But unfortunately, she lived in a time where women, it was very difficult for women to be everything that they could be or they wanted to be. I have no idea how she managed to raise 8 kids at the same time.
Well, it seems like whatever time you live in, trying to sort of be what you want to be and have 8 kids does not, it's not going to be easy. But she was, I mean, to outline a little bit of her biography for our listeners, she was 9 years old when Robert Schumann met her. And Robert Schumann came, he was then, they would have been like 17 or 18. He came to study with her father, who was one of the great piano teachers of the time. And so Robert Schumann met this 9-year-old who was already very accomplished and very gifted. And within a couple of years, it's very like your story, she was traveling around Europe, and she built a reputation as a soloist before Robert did by a long way. She, as you mentioned, wrote this concerto when she started it when she was 13, and she completed it when she was 15 and premiered it with the Gewandhaus Orchestra in Leipzig with Felix Mendelssohn conducting. You know, this is not someone who was sort of pushed aside because she was a little girl. You know, she must have had a lot of charisma. But I find the fact that Robert and Johannes would have probably had a very similar rhythm to you, which is that they started their musical days through improvisation. I find that such a key part of what I want to bring to our audience, the understanding that music, they had that kind of relationship with music, that improvisation was a deep well for them, and they would go to that well and they'd sort of pull things out, and some of the ideas would stick with them, and that would turn into their more formal pieces. And I think that's kind of how you work. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, pieces, also, depending on the composer, of course, and the style, but especially romantic music, they kind of reveal themselves in a very organic manner. It's a very obvious language, in my opinion, and it's really sound bites of memories, of personal memories, of storytelling. That's what improvisation is. You kind of explore who you are and how you feel or what's happening in your life through giving it to the instrument, and what comes out is the most honest rendition of who you are in that moment. And with her concerto, there was the third movement has such beautiful, these beautiful passages that are just so. She repeats them, and it's this kind of insistence, and you can feel. I wonder if she could somehow have an idea that her life was going to be a difficult life. It was not an easy life, but you have this sense of angst, and in someone so young as well is quite remarkable. But I mean, her music just made sense. It completely made sense.
And you've done something extraordinary for us, because you're as generous as you are. We asked you, because improvisation is something that I want our audience to sort of engage with when they're thinking about these three artists. We asked you if you would be prepared to sort of improvise on the recording as a way of connecting the pieces. So those of you that get the recording or listen to it, stream it, you'll hear that the symphony ends, the first Schumann symphony. Then you'll hear an improvisation by Gabriela, which will connect into the piano concerto, and then another improvisation or two from Gabriela, which will link into Brahms's first symphony. Now, this is, if I understand, how also they would have often constructed solo evenings. They would have improvised in between. Is that your understanding too?
Absolutely. And there was, I think at the time, there was a more holistic, let's say, approach to who the artist was. And there was the total artist, of the 19th century of just, just thinking, I'm not only a composer, I'm also a performer, I'm also an improviser. There's no need to divide and separate. And I always talk about that, how we don't need to put these boxes and put artists into boxes. It's the manifestation of a language, whichever form it takes. And I think in her case, and Brahms and Schumann, definitely, it would have been just all part of the same musical world. And I love that you're doing that in the recording, and I'm very honored to be sandwiched between all of them.
We're so grateful, and so you just went into our hall, Southern Hall, and you sat down and you improvised for an hour, and we were, or was it longer?
I was pretty sleep deprived, and I sat down and I improvised. I think it was for about 40 minutes, and it's all new content, and some of the improvs will be in this recording. And when you asked me before in one of the questions, old-fashioned or avant-garde, I think this applies perfectly, because in a way I'm very old-fashioned, because I'm doing something that was done in the past in our classical world. But today it's considered avant-garde, which I find quite interesting, because it's kind of part of history. This is how classical music was presented and was lived, and how it was, Yeah.
So I have, because we're going to listen to one of your improvisations in a moment. Some very quick questions from our wonderful viewers. Are there days you don't feel inspired to compose and improvise?
I always improvise. I mean, some days I won't at the piano, but in my head it's 24 hours all the time.
Really?
It doesn't let me sleep. It's a problem. Yeah.
Really? Okay, that must be frightening sometimes.
Well, I mean, it's a bit frustrating. I can't control it.
And a wonderful singer who I'm sure has many, many musical questions. Her name's Helen Dodge. She's a fantastic singer. She has a fashion question. Where's your top from?
Oh, I saw that before. Oh my God, if you could see my closet, it's pretty messy. I think it's anthropology. I have perfect wardrobe memory. I remember exactly where I bought things. It's terrible.
Well, she'll be thrilled. Thank you for such a simple...
Of course.
So when the lockdown started, something you did was to sort of use that continual flow of improvisation that's in your head for good, so to speak. And you set up you did two things. One was Take One, which is a selection of albums. There's one called the Pajama Sessions. We're going to play some of the Pajama Sessions now. Could you give us a little introduction to that, what you did?
We have a beautiful recording studio at home, and I can see my friends from Orchestra Pianos, Steinway in Barcelona, have been connected, and Elena, who I adore, is the owner, and my piano, whom we call affectionately Didi, it's a Steinway D from Hamburg, the most beautiful instrument, is in my house, and we have these amazing mics. And so we like to make recordings and put them out, on YouTube as improvisation playlists. And what you're going to hear is just the beginning of a playlist that lasted about 40 minutes. And like this, there are several. And in the coming weeks, I'm going to actually be recording some of the repertoire that I play that I never recorded, that I'd like to record, like the Kreisleriana and Schumann Carnival and, some Chopin. And so it's wonderful to have that space.
Fantastic. Well, Kelly is going to give us a little bit of Pajama Sessions. Here we go, I hope.
This is meant to be kind of, subdued and calming. So this is just a little, you know, I wanted to do a playlist that was just improvisations that people could, you know, put at home and starting, you know, in this lockdown, there's so much anxiety and fear, and that would somehow soothe and help people to go through their day, you know?
Well, it is soothing. And I still find it, even though, as you say, it was such a natural part of music history and so many people did this, I still find it breathtaking to experience this idea that you sit at the piano, you turn that tap on. It's like watching a poet create a play in real time. You know, it's we know that it has been done and it's possible, but it's one of the most moving expressions of the profundity of the human mind and soul. You know, I find it genuinely moving that you are able to express it. I have the feeling often when one meets people that deep down in our well of kind of creativity, we all have it there, but we can't necessarily tap into it. So thank you for offering that glimpse into what we could all be, you know?
Well, thank you for appreciating it, you know? It's really my most personal way to make music. It really is.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And Gabriela, I'm going to do a little outro now. But on behalf of everybody watching, our profound thanks that you've been with us today, and my love and from my family and from the whole NAC family to Sam and the girls and everybody who's with you there.
Likewise to you, and I love the NAC. I love everybody. It's just such a wonderful team of people, and what you do with them is absolutely great. So I'm very, very honored to be a part of this recording.
Thank you. Thank you. And the album is released tomorrow. You can find out more about it and get a sneak peek from the NAC website. That's nac-cna.ca, where you can stream or buy it on all of the major platforms. A huge thank you to the sponsors that have made Canada Perform such an important and supportive platform for so many Canadian artists. That's National Arts Centre, Facebook, Slate Music, SiriusXM Canada, and RBC. I'll be back at the same time, so that's noon Eastern time, 5 p.m. in London, 6 p.m. in Berlin, 9 p.m. on the West Coast, and so on May 21st, when I'll be interviewing the extraordinary Misha Brugger-Gossman, and on June 7th with the pianist Jan Leszecki. Please do check out the NAC website. Again, that's nac-cna.ca, where there's lots of content from our musicians. They're giving us daily lunch breaks from their homes. They're really fabulous. And you can sign up to our free weekly symphony concerts from our archives that we're delivering to you. Just sign up and look for home delivery on the NAC website. And if you've enjoyed this, please do like this page, Alexander Shelley. Follow me here on Facebook, on Instagram or Twitter, wherever, and I'll try and keep you updated with stuff that I'm doing and that the NAC is doing. And most importantly, please stay safe, look after yourselves and others, and I hope that we can all see each other in person, ideally in a concert hall with some very beautiful music very soon. Bye-bye, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you.